Funding for Intersections is brought to you by the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.
My name is Carla Hamilton, and I'm an artist and an activist. I was born in Duluth, and I grew up in Renshell. My mom's an artist. She would put paper on the walls so kids can draw on the walls and such. And I didn't really act on it until I got older. My son was probably about 8. And then I went to school, and that gave me the confidence to say, I'm okay at this. I went to art school in Stuttgart, Germany. I learned a discipline. I learned how to work really well with my style of working. And it was my first step at art school. I don't know, some people kind of give you a hard time for going to school for art, how that's a waste of time and that's a waste of money, and you're a bad artist. And I'm glad I did, at least for that little time I did. We're in Germany, and my professors were Russian. Very strict disciplines of art and very traditional ideas of art, I would say. They're like, Carla, what's that? I'm like, that's just how I feel, my interpretation of it. It wasn't difficult, but it was hard to stay in the color, in the lines all the time. And I was really happy when I was done. I'm like, oh, I could do whatever I want, plus what I've learned. I was there for about 2 years. Yeah, it was very structured, and I think for a person like me, I needed that. I'm more disciplined than I think I would have been if I hadn't done that. I know I drove my teachers nuts, because I was like, well, why can't we do this, and why can't we do this? Because I like mixing a lot of different techniques together. Bubbles in My Head is the name of that piece. I made that while I was actually in school. That's a paper collage, and I was having just a mental breakdown. I was getting divorced. That one was really important to me. That's when I realized that I was really good at art, and that maybe I couldn't say words, but I could say through my art and show through my art. I knew I was different. I knew I could do things just besides only painting and only sketching, which are great crafts in themselves, but I made that with paper and shading, and I was like, oh, I like different kinds of art, and it works too. I work at all times of the day. I didn't want an external space because sometimes I work really late at night. Anything bigger, I plan for the summer and I do in my garage, or I spray paint outside. I do a lot of collages, so I need a lot of magazines. I'll dye cloth just free like this, and this is all food coloring, and I have all my trays ready. I have masks, what else? I have buttons, so everything's just kind of, I have a bag of money here somewhere, shredded money. I even use some of my hospital records in my work, so I use everything. But for me, everything has its place. I can work about 2 hours a day on a good day. But I think I've cranked out some pretty amazing art between this and my garage. Now I'm trying to live as a working artist, as a lot of my friends are. My son graduated from high school. He's since moved out, and now I'm actually taking that risk of trying to make most of my income through art. And I do love my art community here, I do. And it's a really close-knit community and just very helpful and supportive with each other. And so I don't think I'd be as successful without them. And I know that since I've been here, it seems to really have grown. I'd say the BIPOC artist community in this area has created its own space and kind of had to push our way to do that. But I think by our competence and our level of work, we've shown we're good. So just creating our own space, because it wasn't always given to us. And that we're not necessarily only doing things about the lake and a raccoon or pine trees or a landscape, which there's nothing wrong with that, but we're doing different kinds of art. And some people are really, they've been kind of hesitant, you know, like, I don't want you in my gallery. So we just make our own shows. And it's been really nice being part of that change. And one of my favorite galleries is the Probe Gallery. They do community involvement, and you can take classes there, and I've had my most successful shows there. My partner, Joshua Williams, took that right down the street. It was a fun photo shoot because I tried to get the police chief to come down the slide. I was going to catch him, and so it was funny. I was walking down the street, and 2 of my friends were with me. They walked in front of me, and I was back a little bit and dug through my purse. And sometimes I explain, well, there was a party going on over there, but I'm not going to explain that. I'm just going to say, this is what I was doing. And all of a sudden, there's a police officer in my face. One police car was there. He said, what are you doing? are you bothering these people? My friends are like, these are my friends. I'm just looking at my purse. Were you screaming? I'm like, no. And they kept asking me my name. And then another car showed up. I'm like, what is going on? I'm just walking out with my friends. I just put my hands on my head, I'm like, oh my God. And then a third car shows up for me, and I wasn't doing anything. I was frightened. I was having a panic attack. My brain's pumping, and it just escalated like that. And it scared the hell out of me. And it made me angry. And then they kept asking me my name over and over and over, and I kept spelling it for them. And all I'm thinking is, God, who's gonna take care of my son? And do I have bail money? And then before you know it, they're all talking to each other, and they got another call, I think, and they ended up just leaving. And I just stood there like this, and I felt exhausted when it was over. It really scared me. And I requested the body cam footage, which they made complicated, which I had to pay for. And then we had mediation with two of those officers. And we were trying to explain to the police officers why that was so terrifying. And one was really like, I'm sorry, it shouldn't have escalated, I'm still training. And he was younger and he was apologizing, and we ended up actually making jokes. There was another one who didn't want to talk about any improvement, that anything escalated or any wrong was done. And even Mike said too, it's like, that's the kind of officer we don't want. We don't want him. It was really humbling to talk about that experience in the open. We don't want it to happen to anybody else. We want these officers to know how that impacts a person. That impacted my whole family. And things like that have happened before, but it impacts everybody. And it's frightening. Walking somewhere and you don't feel safe all the time, that takes a toll on somebody. In regards to that photo, I don't feel the same as I did when I made that show. The history was to create an alliance between the BIPOC community and the police department, and I don't feel a lot changed from that time between then and now, and I find that unfortunate. So I feel differently about that show then as I do now. I try to be very involved in my community any way I can, through art or volunteering, or organizing or making space for people who don't feel comfortable. I think my art is a part of activism because it does talk about things that make people uncomfortable. So it creates discussion, it creates conversation, and hopefully it'll create change. My goals are to have bigger exhibits and bigger installations. I like installations. And just keep growing. I'm glad I didn't take early on some opportunities that I'm glad I didn't react to or act on, because I don't think I was ready. I think I'm where I am right now is good, and so I just want to keep going up and up and up and up. Yeah, I think it's going to happen if I stay at the pace that I am at right now.
I'm Anja Chávez. I'm the director at the Tweed Museum of Art. I have a master's degree and PhD. My education took place in Germany at the University of Bonn, as well as in Paris at the State University École Normale Supérieure, Sorbonne 4 in Paris. That made me an art historian. I'm a product from 100% public education, which I'm very proud of. For becoming a curator, you had to have a PhD. So you had to take classes depending on which field you wanted to do, but you had to have an education all the way around. So I did archaeology, I did history, but I also was studying across the board a little bit and comparative literature, but the focus was on art history. And then within art history, you had to make sure that you covered all the periods. Matter of fact, some of the tests towards the end were that you were given postcards that were facing down, and you could choose them, 10 of them, but then you had to really say, what is it? If it's a true work, is it authentic, is it a fake, and what century is it, and what are we looking at? So you had to do Renaissance as well as medieval times, Byzantine, contemporary 20th century, depending on what you wanted to do. And some of those classes actually took place in museums. I mean, I've been living in the United States since mid-90s. I mean, in a way, I think everybody brings a different perspective. Is the perspective of the person who's coming from the outside better than the perspective of the person who's from here? Not necessarily. But I think it's more maybe what we can do together. It's never about one person. What you see here on display, it's not all my work. Some of it might be an idea, but working with the team, working with community members. I have to say my colleague, late Carissa White Isaacs, who has also a PhD, passed away tragically mid-December. So she has been the curator here at the Tweed, and in that capacity she did the curatorial work. So it was her idea and her plan to work with Jonathan Thunder, and she did. So the outcome that you see is what she put in place, and she had worked with Jonathan before. So the museum is there for people. It's not an outcome of one person. Every city is different, every community is different, and that's what I think makes it so exciting. No museum is exchangeable, not just because their collections are different, but also because their needs are totally different. Well, the idea was to discuss it with the communities, which I did. So I brought to their attention that we had an opportunity to potentially borrow that particular exhibition from the Delaware Art Museum, and in borrowing it from the Delaware Art Museum, covered by grant funds, we could go in for a grant that would cover their salaries for 2 coordinators and cover salaries for, at the time being, 10 community committee members to give us input. Because I didn't want to determine, nor anybody else on my staff, what could be done or can be done, even though we potentially could, but moving away from how museums traditionally have done their business towards how museum should be working, and not just including voices, but basically, in a way, sitting back and listening. It's more voices, not just to be heard and to listen to, but also ways of making a change, ways of doing things differently to include more and being more democratic and progressive. We're part of the university, and being part of the university, we're an academic museum, we're a teaching museum. So whether you have temporary exhibitions that are, let's say, curated by faculty or curated by faculty in conjunction with students, they're there for everybody. They're certainly extremely helpful for curriculum-based teaching, but they're also incredibly relevant for our communities, such as Black Survival Guide. I had responses or received responses from community members how important that exhibition was. I think it's enriching to have a museum of that way, with two legs, the teaching academic side and the community side. I was told by students that told me, given the Black Survival Guide exhibition, they were able to actually talk with their white peers about topics that otherwise they didn't think they could really approach. So I thought that was really enriching for me to know. We live in really more than just challenging times. I think it's not just the last 2 years, it's not just a pandemic, it's the war in Ukraine, it's just a lot of things going on. When you think about all of the things and the upheaval you have seen, Minneapolis, social injustice, there's a lot that is happening. Could museums do a better job in being more inclusive? That has been talked about for decades. Could stuff be more diversified? Could there be more non-white, female, or other, leaderships in leadership positions? Could you have a more diverse board? Could you reach to those kind of areas to make a difference or wanting to make a change? Or should the museum try to help right now in those times individuals to cope with situations in terms of mental issues? There's a lot that has been talked about, and I think museums can do all of the above. You can come to a museum and truly enjoy what you see and just enjoy the beauty. You can come to museums and look at it and have a fantastic discussion about topics. So I do think that we have a huge impact on our communities. So I think we are the only museum with that sort of a fine arts collection within a larger range, and we know whom we are serving. But that being said, we as a museum need also to learn more about what community members are wishing, not just to see on display, but what are they wishing us to do for them. And that's the listening part that museums in general need to do more of, and that's the, getting away from the more traditional way how museums have done the business, and making sure that museums remain relevant to their communities.
Next up, we have Classie Dudley.
I'm the president of the Duluth NAACP here. We're the largest chapter in the state of Minnesota. With over 1,400 members, we reach Duluth, the Twin Ports, all the way up to the Canadian border. So we fight for y'all.
I'm a product of Duluth. I was born and raised here, and we often think that Duluth is this great place for everybody. We're so, welcoming here. We're Minnesota nice. And I personally experienced, discrimination. I personally was told like I would never graduate or be an A student. My dad, he used to work for the Human Resources Department of ISD 709. He would walk in a suit and I would be there with him, and kids would think that he was Obama because the kids there had never seen a black man in a suit before. When we left and moved to Texas, and I did a couple years in Texas in high school, even though I'm sure the structural issues and barriers are still present, at least I was around people that looked like me. There was black doctors there were black lawyers. I was really influenced and inspired by all these people that were doing influential things in the community. And when I came back to Duluth, I didn't see any of that. The only depiction of a black person in our city is the Clayton Jackson McGee Memorial. While it's important to know that, it depicts a very traumatic and horrific event in history.
Not many people know that during the Clayton Jackson McGee lynchings, when they drug 3 black men out of the jail cell and hung them in the middle of the city, that's when the NAACP started.
A little over a year ago, I was elected into this position. The inequities that I've experienced haven't gone away, they've actually amplified. We get a lot of rapid response calls with our schools right here and schools in the surrounding area of inequities, of disproportionate suspension and expulsion rates. And it's such a complex system, and it's such a system that takes a lot of time to push on it, but I try to emphasize that we don't have this luxury of time. People are really being affected in real time. Take Denfeld High School calendar, where it's pretty bare. You take East High School calendar, where they're having all these college visits, right? I want to highlight these inequities because it's something that Duluth doesn't think about, because for the white students are fine, but if you're looking at kids of color, if you're looking at kids that are coming in low income, if we're failing one student, we're failing them all. And we're not talking about millions of students, we're not talking about thousands of students, right? We're talking about a couple hundred of students. If we're talking about, over a 4-year period, that's 100% fixable. That's the stuff that the NAACP has uncovered and are trying to focus on restorative justice tactics and changing how we're viewing certain things and how we don't need to be such a punitive society. So that was a mess. When I ran, the past president, who we're in a good place today, was very influential in overturning that election. I will say my election was valid in terms of the Constitution. I would just say that I didn't have a strong support system as I would have liked to when I ran the first time. After that, I took some time off of the NAACP, went back to school. It was a really good point for me to learn how to be prepared and how to show up and what is needed, and it was a good wake-up call. I was down there right after it happened, guarding Black businesses. The current president of the Minneapolis chapter, Leslie Redmond, and I were really close, so I would go back and forth to the cities and help patrol Black businesses until when the National Guard came in, and it kind of settled down after a little bit after that. I saw more people wanting to do something or realizing maybe their privilege. I mean, there was a big uptick of membership. We had gotten more people willing to volunteer. We had more people willing to, spend dollars on NAACP initiatives. I could say that what happened in Minneapolis was a catalyst for our allies, but for anybody who has been in this fight for advocacy, for civil rights, this is nothing new. It was nothing that came as a shock. I was probably, if nothing more, desensitized to it. I mean, we lost a lot of people for COVID, and it negatively impacted people of color. COVID was a huge catalyst for the health inequities. I think what's been happening in the last couple of years has definitely been able to shine a light on everything that the NAACP is working on, especially within our Twin Ports here. Not only as my role as president of the NAACP, but as my role as owner of a homeless shelter. Like, I'm seeing this completely different side of Duluth, and what it looked like to me on the inside was these issues are being ignored. And so being able to be a part of an organization that highlights these inequities and pushes past the barriers and disrupts the status quo was, I don't even have words for it. These are real changes that can happen here. When I was elected with a brand new board. So that was in 2020, and I officially took office in 2021. My executive committee and myself have only been around for about a year and a half. I was able to gather a very strong group of individuals who are passionate and relentless about getting this work done. 80% of what we work on is strategic upstream initiatives to end systemic racism and systemic inequalities. The other 20% is the work that we do with the community. We do the Juneteenth. We do the MLK programming, like really community involvement stuff and sponsoring other organizations. Another program that we do on top of that is our Rapid Response Initiative, and our Rapid Response just attacks overt acts of racism when they happen.
One young swimmer made more than a splash at a local swim meet when she was nearly disqualified for wearing a suit that read Black Lives Matter on it.
And I mean, that's what that was. It was an overt act of racism. And I really believe that Duluth just needed somebody now, today, to call it out, who's calling it out in an unbiased way. We gotta hold everybody accountable. But if I see somebody being treated unfairly, especially a student who shouldn't have to be facing racism on any level at that age, I'm gonna show up, and I'm gonna show up fierce. I heard swimmer lady was facing that very overt act of discrimination, wearing a swimsuit that says my life matters, and wasn't allowed to swim because of that. I wasn't gonna allow that to happen. So being able to call these allies for them to come up and show up in the moment, having the vice president of the YMCA show up in that moment and support us, having the executive director of the YMCA continually supporting Lady and the NAACP, like that's the kind of allyship we need. So it was an event that I think we can be like, this is a learning experience, and like, how can we make Duluth better? How can we make Superior better? How can we make our community in the Twin Ports better? But also being able to attack it right when it happens. A lot of news station picked it up. A lot of Black Swimmers organization picked it up. LeBron James put it on his Instagram page. You know, the Lieutenant Governor Peggy put it on her Instagram story. Like, it was amazing to get recognition for the work that we're doing. But I was just excited for Lady. Like, she's such a boss in her own right. Being able to see her get all the support coming in is something that, you know, I wish I had when I was growing up. I never want another child to feel like this. And if I can be that buffer, if I can be that shield, I will gladly take that and wear that, you know, that armor for these kids.
During COVID, I fought for my workers. I own a homeless shelter here in Duluth. I fought for my workers because they weren't considered critical workers during the height of the epidemic. So I fought with the county to give my staff and workers a fair wage and to be considered critical workers, which they declined on multiple levels, on multiple occasions. And guess what I did? It was really easy. I cut my salary in half and I gave that to my people because they're more important than me sitting behind a desk. There's no such thing as this takes time. It takes time when we let them take time.
In its totality, systemic change looks like nobody experiencing barriers, right? Everybody getting an actual fair chance at life and at experiencing things that people who are privileged get to experience, regardless of their education, of their skin color, of what they identify as in their gender. In the long range of things, a systemic change brings down those barriers that we put in as a society. And the amazing thing about systemic change also is that we make it in place that it's sustainable, and that it doesn't matter if Classie is the president of the NAACP or Dan Smith, or Jane Doe is the president. Change is still happening, and this change is still eliminating barriers regardless of who's in power, because we're giving these people who are closest to the pain all the power and really giving everybody that chance of success. I try to be more optimistic on where we can go, but I've just been living here for so long, and I've seen people who look like me struggle, and I've seen people who look like me get up and leave because we don't have a sense of community here that supports us and supports people who look like me. People ask me how many hours I put in it, and I'm like, it's really, for me, it's like an 8 to 8 or an 8 to 9. I do love it because I'm seeing the change. The one thing that I do love about Duluth is that, we're small enough to really make a big impact that could change the rest of the country. We've seen it happen before, and we could do it again. We just need more of our ally support, and we need our allies not telling us what to do and how to do it. We need them to jump on board with what we're doing.
Funding for Intersections is brought to you by the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund and the citizens of Minnesota.